Hello and welcome to Future Medicine AI. Today we're joined by Liam Cahill, who's going to be taking us through a journey of healthcare systems and understanding how technology can play a role in shaping them. Importantly, what challenges are also faced by health systems at the moment, specifically the NHS, and some of his perspectives on what the future looks like. So, hope you enjoy. Well, Liam, thank you very much for joining us.
Great to be here.
And Soren, can you start off reluctantly telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey?
Yeah. So, in a nutshell, I'm Liam. I have been working in the world of healthcare for 20 years now, which makes me feel like an old middle-aged man, but there you go. And my background was computer science. That's what it was when, when tech didn't get the girls, no, everyone was just like, yeah, we're not talking to you in the student union. And so, basically, I fell into healthcare and I fell in love with healthcare, probably not for the reasons that many sort of sycophantically do. I love the fact that it's a wonderful societal human endeavour, but it's one that I also toil with as well. And I spent a number of years working on national systems and IT rollout in the classic form, got to see how that worked. I then spent a number of years independently consulting. I then moved to take on a medicines and prescribing efficiency project, which had to save just under £90 million for one of the NHS regions with a pharmacist, and we were building that up together. And basically my journey was that snowballed in a very chaotic NHS, where we ended up building something that scaled across the NHS, worked with every single different area, and built this, used a lot of digital tools. So we, for example, introduced, I know it seems like sort of old hat now, but like business intelligence to a whole community of commissioners who were all then comparing themselves against each other when previously they'd been working on spreadsheets. So, and building this community where we actually tried to reverse this kind of top-down, at the top they tell you to do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, to actually a democratic grassroots sort of community that decided what it wanted to do and held us accountable, and we gave away total ownership on it. And ultimately that took me down a route of progressivism, which sounds like a very wanky term, but I suppose the concept that actually nowadays, I suppose I was quite stunned, and I spent a lot of time thinking, how is it that we managed to be so much more effective in doing what we did than others? Was it because we were using technology well? Was it because right place, right time? Was it because of our winning smiles? Who knows? But I think the thing that I saw was that actually we entirely changed the model and did something that very much disrupted the institutional, very sort of broken model of how things work. And so once we got to 100%, and I kind of felt like my work there was done, and I decided I wanted to try and see how much I could take this story of, we're in this age, we're in the beginning of a digital industrial revolution, or when I started 7 years ago, we were debating whether we were. We obviously know that we are now. And I started doing a lot of work with frontline providers doing what they may call radical experiments, but basically experiments that gave clinicians total agency and control on how they wanted to use technology with a view towards creativity and them being able to solve the problems rather than people just doing stuff to them with tech, which probably sort of gives an indication of how I've got to some of these conclusions. So, and a lot of my hypothesis was these experiments were alien to the organisations they were in. And what I really saw was that actually the only way that this could really be successful is if we change the organisation and our paradigms about how an organisation should be run and who should make decisions. And I think that kind of touches back on upon the progressivism. So fast forward, I've done a bunch of special advisory work with NHS England. I've worked with a number of frontline providers. I've done a year-long course trying to help people unpick their organisations. So I did it for people working in organisations. I also did it for CEOs and FDs and, sort of the C-suite of leaders, to try and think about some of the issues they were perpetuating in their organisations, when actually in this world of complexity, maybe they need to be doing the exact opposite. And I won't go into too much detail around this. Similarly, I've worked with health tech companies, so I kind of sit on both sides. I sort of sit on the tech industry looking in. Lots of companies doing AI, and obviously every tech company is doing AI nowadays, so it's easy to say. But who are genuinely doing AI, not just running a sentiment model somewhere, or an LLM nowadays, of course, And on the other side, I work on the system. So I think my mission, my work tends to be sort of on both sides of the coin on how to what are we designing and how are we designing it, and what are the principles and processes and structures we need to have in order to make this work. So with health tech companies, I think a lot of my work is that I understand this messy system, how it actually works, and I help them to be able to understand how it really works versus how sometimes a very everything is awesome NHS tells them it works, which is not necessarily true. So basically, long story short, I dance around, do lots and lots of different stuff. I work with the military around disruption and, sort of mentor a load of military leaders and a bunch of other stuff that I can't remember off the top of my head. So
yeah, that's fantastic. Very good introduction.
Oh, thank you.
And what would you say, to steal your phrase here, is the golden thread that sort of sits through all of this?
And I think obviously, before these things, we have a conversation about what we want to talk about. And I think, you and I both know in advance of this is probably what we're going to be talking about quite a lot. But I think I find myself very concerned on both sides that we have very sort of reactionary ways of working in the system. We're still very much stuck in an industrial Newtonian mindset about how systems should work. We've got a population with very different ideas who are coming in, and we've got a number of battles going on in that area. And, in tech companies, we're trying to find a way to be able to properly fit a system. I guess zooming back, and I spend a lot of time zooming back, I do a lot of work in systems thinking and so on, is we don't really have a master plan for this. And the golden thread for me is that I want to try and, I don't want to make grandiose statements here, but I want to be banging a drum with others who are also banging a drum to reimagine how our health and social care and maybe wider public sector systems can work in an age of genuine digital revolution and complexity and, amazing technologies such as artificial intelligence. Because we know that in the past, the last industrial revolution, reshaped society, so why will this not too? And so a lot of my work is trying to help, bring these areas together of the technologists and the people who are thinking about the system to actually say, well, what is it we're going to build? Like just on the way in, I was reading a plan for a local system, and it was the 2040 transformation plan. And it mentioned technology once as a byproduct, and things like technology, which is in another plan. And I was like, well, how are we thinking, and it was all very much in the current mindset. And I see all the time that we're imagining a system in 2040 is 16 years. Shit, things are going to be different in 16 years, right?
I mean, you've seen what's happened in the last 5 with...
Exactly, yeah. So, I think the golden thread is that I'm trying to help us think a bit more widely about what we're actually trying to do here and what could we do to go in the right direction rather than potentially perilous directions. So,
yeah, well, I think you've painted a really good picture of, what your interests are and I guess what your priorities are in your work. So for those who aren't so familiar with the concept of systems organization regarding the NHS and healthcare systems in general, can you just give a bit of overview of where we are now, this concept of technical autocracy? And because you've mentioned that you feel like we're almost sleepwalking into this concept of technical autocracy, and what are the issues of the system at the moment? The fundamental ones.
I won't try and eat that whole elephant in one go, but let's just talk about the system. So, I talk about the system like it's a thing that people use every day, but obviously I live in that. So, by the system, obviously, a contemporary modern healthcare system is effectively probably one of the most complex human constructions in existence, right? The amount of things that we deal with, the responsibilities, the way that we deal with people, we're in and out of people's lives. And, in this system that we, I don't preside over it, I, poke at it from the outside, but that, that people who are running the system, run this, there is, it is a mechanical system and a technical system. And there's a great writer called Aaron Dignan, who's in the sort of progressive group, who says that our ability to do things is very much based on our operating system and things like strategy and mastery and who can make decisions and investment and autonomy and all of these different kinds of things. And we have a healthcare system, which is thousands of different independent organizations who have all been broken down into little silos with specific contracts and payment mechanisms that tell them what to do. And, you know, at the top, we've got a government who's telling us everything we want to hear and making all these grand statements and doing big engagements at the moment with very leading questions. So they've got the people's mandate to make a change and all of this different stuff. But ultimately, we have a system which has a design. And the design of probably most contemporary modern systems, including healthcare, is, you know, like I work with the military and healthcare systems, and both of them are very, very different. You know, military is literally, you could take an org chart and it is rank and file downwards. Whereas the NHS looks and smells like it might be different. You know, you've got doctors who think differently and they're independent and so on, you know, but ultimately we have the same underlying issue, which I think is creating many of the problems that we are finding at the moment. So, and that is that we treat the system like it's complicated, like it's plannable, and we have this very sort of industrial mindset which we don't seem to be able to shake off. And so, you know, many of the inherent problems, you know, I on my systems thinking course, I kind of broke down a number of the problems, and it was like, you know, we point at stuff and suggest an answer. And this is going to solve things. But from a systems thinking perspective, you know, there's a saying that today's problems are yesterday's solution, and there is causality that happens when we are creating things. And, you know, that everything creates a repercussion, which creates a repercussion, which creates a repercussion. And in our system at the moment, I think, you know, people are looking at thinking, how did it go so wrong? Is it not enough money? Is it, I don't know, like, you know, bad governance? Is it whatever? I think the problem that we have is that we're moving into a very different world, and we are trying to deal with the challenges that world faces, and we're not equipped to do it. And everybody's in their own box, trying to work out how they can fix something within that little square box around them, in all their different boxes, and it's not fixing anything. So yeah, like, you know, it's been covered quite a lot in the news recently about how many challenges that the NHS is facing, and lots of different people have different views about why and what the cause is. You know, we've recently had a review called the Darcy Review, which was quite well publicised, which gave a mandate for the government to say it's broken, we're going to fix it. Or actually, the Health Secretary said, I'm going to fix it, which is the most hero leadership crap that you can get around. But, you know, there you go. I suppose you've got to have that mindset to get into that position, right? So, and of course, they are now pointing at AI and saying AI is going to come and save the NHS, which maybe we'll get into. So I hope that gives enough. Like, you know, I've just done a course for tech companies on how to understand the NHS and how to respond to it. And my module on understanding the NHS was about an hour and 6 minutes long, just going through how it works. So, like, I'm sure your listeners probably don't want to hear that level of detail, but I hope that kind of covers it in a sort of general nutshell. If it hasn't, tell me what I haven't covered, and I'll
I think that absolutely covers it in a nutshell. And this concept of, I guess, centralization that you spoke about as well, you've kind of championed this idea of decentralization. Would you say this idea of decentralization and empowering?
I think I can feel like a lone voice on that one sometimes. So it's definitely something that I strongly believe in. Yeah. So do you want to tell us a bit more about this idea of decentralization? Yeah. Like, I think, okay, if we go slightly philosophically, I have a belief that the technology of the age shapes how the society of the age functions. And so we had a feudal society where it was all pickaxes and people pushing ploughs in field. 94% of the population worked in the field. It was an agrarian community. And at the end of it, 4% of people did. The industrial mindset, you know, the Newtonian mindset, which is everything can be broken down into its component parts, has designed how society works. It's created mountains of institutionality and so on. And, you know, we're very much in this world where it's seen as strange if you have self-managing organisations or decentralised organisations. But actually, if we look at technology, the shape of technology is rhizomatic. It's a network. You know, the shape of a highly popularised large language model is a decentralised network of information which is pulled together in order to produce patterns, right? And so, for me, I'll take a few of these experiences. One, building and running a decentralised organisation showed me how much can happen without all the bullshit of bureaucracy and red tape and mechanics and so on. I think there's a growing voice in society now, particularly amongst the younger generation, who are saying, the younger generation, God, I forgot the younger generation, but who are saying, actually, I don't want to spend my career working for an institution. I don't want to come in and do this. I want to have some agency, like for right and wrong. Like I've also seen the dark side of that, where I've had people who've just graduated working for me and they want their impact and they want to write the summary of the paper that I've been brought in to write. And it's kind of like, okay, like you may need to do a few more years and actually understand the health system before you do that. But I think, you know, if we look at many of the, like, okay, if we look at how social media has crafted community, it is centrally held, but it's decentralized in how the network operates. And of course, artificial intelligence plays a role in facilitating that. I've built a community and made lots of connections on LinkedIn. That is entirely decentralized. Like, weirdly, I have built a voice that some people listen to and that can sometimes be able to get some reception from places that I couldn't have got as a relative nobody. I'm just a guy who on LinkedIn who writes about stuff, who does some work with the NHS, right? I don't have an official position and so on. And that's because we have this sort of, emerging model of, I don't know if you've ever read the book New Power, but this New Power model, which is starting to change where power in society comes from. Politics is largely dictated by what's happening on social media now, rather than in, I don't know, like gentlemen's clubs. So it's already happening. The shape of the internet is rhizomatic, and so it only stands to reason that if we want a functional model that matches what productivity looks like, then in itself it needs to be decentralized. And when I sit down with organizations, many of the problems they experience is that they're just stuck in paralysis because they're too root and branch, they're too Newtonian, and they can't innovate, they can't get things done. And so for me, I think if we look at the technology, if we look at what's happening right now in society, if we look at the challenges we face and actually just break them apart and look at the fact that they're generally due to problems of complexity, to me, all of these things are screaming, we need to decentralize, we need to lean into this and try and reimagine society. And people say, well, I talk quite a lot about a decentralized NHS, and people go, oh, it's not possible, you can't do it. Well, I'm sure if you sat down with a group of people working in a farm before the Industrial Revolution and described society, they were going, it's impossible, that can't work. But these potent technologies are going to create this, and we're just trying to move the pieces around a little bit to make sure that we get, we get an outcome in this. So, those who say it can't be done, I think in 50 years we'll have a very different view of these things.
Yeah, so. And I guess to an extent, the NHS or the health service geographically is decentralized, as in you have like trusts and things like that, right?
In theory.
In theory.
So
can you touch a bit on how that is still centralized?
Yeah. So, there are certain pockets where there's more autonomy than others. I think that health leans into particularly clinical autonomy.
Yeah.
But if in our minds we take the view of centralization being that it's kind of like an org chart or a root and branch or a logical pathway where it's structured and we follow that, and we just look at the different iterations of how things work. Firstly, the money is decided at the top, the objectives are decided at the top. You get Q&As that come from the centre, but realistically, how the NHS functions gets decided by a small group of people at the very top, and then the way that the system operates will change as a result of that. That's not decentralised, that's centralised. Next, we have a system which is dominated by compliance and adherence to pathways, set by institutional organisations such as National Institute of Health and Care Excellence, NICE. And we try and spend all of our time reducing the variation, which is a very strong topic, reducing variation in the NHS, and getting people to be able to follow how antimicrobial resistance works, or antimicrobial stewardship will work, or asthma pathways and stuff like that. So, if you go into a general practice, yes, you have a doctor who has relative autonomy, but what that doctor is paid to do and not paid to do is defined at the top. The pathways that they are asked to adhere to, so they don't prescribe a duck, they prescribe a medicine. They don't prescribe a duck. And the reason everyone prescribes a medicine is because evidence dictates a pathway which they're asked to follow. So, and in hospitals, we have a degree of control as well. Now, I think we get close to decentralization, but I think that the principle of integration that's come in over the last how many years, and we're slow in the UK, like the Netherlands did it, I think it's about 14 years ago, right? So, the idea of integration is that all the partners kind of work together to make something happen. But I think a lot of the challenges come from central meddling and institutional efforts to control. So right now, for example, the integrated systems, the vast majority of them are in deficit, so NHS England's leaning into them and going through every line of their spend and saying what you can and can't spend. Maybe that will change with the new government, who knows, but some of the recent sounds have not been positive on that front. And so I suppose if you pick it apart, there are elements of decentralization. I think the system is highly conducive to being decentralized, but there is this battle always between the control at the center, create, and using lots of terms like equity and postcode lottery and stuff like that, and then people who are trying to find their own autonomy. And if we were genuinely decentralized the system and clinicians, who are the vast majority of the workforce, had autonomy, they wouldn't be leaving in droves. They are, because they feel like many of them feel like that their jobs are just, they've got no autonomy, that they're not doing the right thing, they've just been asked to do X, Y, and Z. Who's asking them? Well, you go upwards. That's how the system functions. So it doesn't always have to be material like the military that I described. Sometimes it's in the fabric and the mechanics of how that system works without it being so overt. So yeah.
And where do you think technology fits into all of this? Because digitization is one thing, and digitization is, it's been on the timeline for a while, but AI is a whole new story, I guess. And so where does digitization by itself fit into?
So, I think it fits in the whole of society, and is pervasive in everything, and the system's trying to work out how it catches up and reacts to it. So, I don't think there's a place that technology doesn't really cover already at the moment. But in terms of artificial intelligence, and I think this is, I think this is where we sort of think about the red pill, blue pill model, because this is where are we going now? Where do we go next, right? Because to be totally honest, if you go into the average hospital and go into a ward and look for all their stuff and go, where's the AI? There's no AI, right? So at the moment, there's not huge amounts of AI floating around the system. So at the moment, the role of AI is that it's this thing that a lot of people are scared of. It's a thing that has all of this hype and, big stories about, robot armies taking over stuff and, humans becoming extinct because of it. And then we've got other ones talking about utopian promises of this, that, and the other. And no one's actually really sat down to explain to them what it is. And so, when I was doing my course, one of the things that I made sure that I did is I just broke down automation, because a lot of AI is automation, right? It's intelligent or process automation. We can replicate a process and get a piece of technology to do it, or we can replicate a decision, increasingly sort of complex decisions, of course, or complicated decisions. And so, it's starting to slip in. But I suppose in terms of the role that it could play, there's a whole, artificial intelligence is not one thing. You know this, right?
Yeah.
It is in many different things. So, you could take the self-driving car analogy and say, well, actually, seeing people's day-to-day risk and the stratification of risk and, making decisions that where it's so accurate in the future that doctors, that doctors agree it by proxy. If you borrow what Yuval Noah Harari says in *Sapiens* and Parmenides and 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, he imagines that we're not far away from a society where we don't even need to bother to vote because AI knows our intentions and what's the point, right? So it just automatically votes for us. And so, we're going to be getting in self-driving cars. Well, why can't we have self-driving doctors? And there's a load of doctors I know be like, because they've looked at ChatGPT and said it can't replace a doctor, but it's happening in these places. And so it's going to come in, I guess, going back to, I suppose, my golden thread that you're using in this is that, like, what are we choosing to have? Like, what are we choosing? Like, because for me, I can see that AI can come in and play a role of mass displacement in healthcare, and a technologized service which is all consistently driven on efficiency, and intervention, like micro intervention in people's lives, that is trying to improve outcomes, all based on risk stratification, and that can lead us towards a better system. Where Streeting says AI, we got to get more AI. Well, for what? Like, because the other one is, the other root of this is that, like, I'm hugely empowered by AI day in, day out. I use AI every day to just be more productive and to be more creative and do lots of different things, as we were talking about before this, around Mid-Journey and, image generation, and just, using it for really interesting reasons. But I guess, like, LinkedIn, social networks, there's ways that we can connect communities and use it so people can find out what others are doing and be inspired by other people's. Well, there's so much that we could do to empower people in the system, or there's so much that we could do to just disempower and displace and create an automated healthcare system. Like, and I think, that's where we start saying, well, what's AI doing or going to do? Based on what I see around, I don't see any central vision for that. I do not see any, like, I see people banging drums about the use of AI, but what are we intending to build? There is no central vision for this in any modern healthcare system, as far as I can see. And yet it's one of the most important tenets of our life. It's our health, and it's our it's our relationship with the state, and our own autonomy in our own lives. And it worries me that we don't have that. So I don't know the answer to that. That's a very long answer, is where I conclude if I don't know the answer, but I don't know the answer to that question at the moment. I know what I think should be, and I know what I do in microcosms, but I could read all of the closest thing I've ever got to reading it is the Topol review, which was written by a genuine expert in AI, or someone who we can definitely get that title right. Which he did with Health Education England. It was brilliant. It was really good. It talked about the vision for how it could work. We've done the exact opposite for that sense. That we're not working towards that objective. But since then, it's all about virtual wards and people getting diagnostics at home and stuff, getting close to the community. But that's not the future of a healthcare system. That's just moving the chairs around a little bit,
Yeah. I think what you said there, the listeners will probably find quite surprising, that you can't see that there is a central vision by the government or healthcare systems around the world working towards sort of a digital future, when everywhere else in our lives has become so imperative or so much a part of augmenting what we do.
Yeah. But if everyone's stuck in their silos looking at their own specific thing, like, where are the philosophers who are, bringing together and convening groups of people? It's all reactive to current challenges. We have a system that is entirely reactive. So building and discussing a vision for what are, like, Labour's coming through with a new plan. I absolutely guarantee that it will not have a big view. It won't have a central view of this is what we're working towards. This is our vision for what the healthcare system looks like, and we're working towards that within this 10-year plan. The Tony Blair Institute has said stuff about AI, and it's again, it doesn't feel like a blueprint that we can buy into.
Do you think it doesn't go far enough?
I think it's technophilic. I think it's all just about, I think it's just subscribed to
the idea of technology,
tech for tech's sake.
Yeah.
And the concern that I have too often, and I see this all the time, is, including by the current health secretary, like, saying that the technology is the means and the end, right? So that technology is both of those things, right?
Yeah.
But we should be defining what we want with technology, and we should be discussing the use of it, not just saying, let's do tech because tech's going to change, it's going to fix everything. That's not a vision. That's just pointing at something.
Yeah. And I guess there's an argument as well, and this is something that Keith Grimes said when we had him on recently, that actually it's almost imperative that we use technology in healthcare, because there's not really a world that exists where you can get enough people or enough doctors to be able to meet the growing demand for healthcare services, and there's not enough resources in terms of people to be able to
100%. Like, you know, there is no, you know, and I think, you know, like spending many years in the field of like advocating for technology, you know, sometimes there's this argument of like, well, yeah, but healthcare's different. Healthcare's different, you know, like it's you can't technologize that. Yeah. The whole of society's changing, and what you can't, like, if you sort of, here's this society, right, and the whole damn thing is root and branch changing, the fabric of society we live in. What we're going to do is we're going to circle in the middle of it, right, and we're going to say, this is our healthcare system, and we're not going to technologize that. We can't, just can't. Like, all of this technology that is doing all of these amazing, we're not going to do that. Like, it is an inevitability, you know, in the scenarios I think about the future. Not technologizing the system is just not possible. Like, staff, like people like you and me in society are going to feel that we can't go and work in a system which is entirely backwards, because we're going to be behind in society. We've got to think about our futures in this, right? Yeah. You know, like, so you're going to start, you know, when I was doing my executive course, I talked about the disruption of technology being like death by 1,000 cuts, because people walk into the environment and they go, what the fuck is this? Like, you want me to think this way? You want me to do that? But hold on, like, I'm a YouTuber and I do this, and I've got 3,000 followers on Twitch. Yeah,
Twitch,
I'm not on Twitch.
Yeah.
I'm not on Twitch, right? Yeah, and you know, like, and all of this stuff, and I've run my own side hustle with this business, and I've got like a Stripe thing, and you know, like, I've got people buying my designs, and they come in and they go, right, but actually, here's this like old desk. Like, people will leave. You won't get talent, and we won't get a good health system as a result. Like, but there's also the economic factors. Like, the whole process of introducing technology is going to be that it reduces the cost of doing things, right? You know, a business 20 years ago would have had like 15 people doing functions that you wouldn't have 15 for now, because you've got, you know, like a piece of accountancy software, you know, everyone's sitting there looking line by line. I remember when I started my business in 2009, I had to fill in a spreadsheet in every line. Now I'm just message my accountant and go, I think I screwed up that line. Can we fix it? You know, but it's all just largely done. I've got automation rules. I spend minutes going in every month, you know? Yeah. Like, so, you know, running a business or an operation is going to be smaller. And if you can't meet those economics, then healthcare just mushrooms in cost, when the rest of the world is trying to find marginal gains and efficiencies. So it can't, like, the whole environmental and sort of economic and societal conditions are going to force it down that road. And this is where we are now. We're pointing at the system saying it's unaffordable, it's too expensive. And we have that moment, we have that tipping point now where we have no option but to rapidly technologize. And so there is no choice in that. You know, it has to happen, it will happen. But the design, going back to the previous thing, what we're actually going to get as a result of that is the thing which is not determined by doing it, you know.
And what is your perspective on the design? I mean, that's kind of an impossible question to ask you, like how you think it should change. But what are your thoughts on the design? Because, you know, integrating technology has its own challenges in the NHS, doesn't it? It's a long journey to get stuff integrated.
So let's say we have a society where nobody, you know, because I think you can't look at the future of the health system and the design of the health system without looking at society. And one of the things that is really getting my goat at the moment is that we have, like, I was watching a video last night talking about microplastics and about ultra-processed food and all of the toxicity of everything that we have in our lives, and that it's making us sick, right?
Yeah.
And we're not, so, you know, and a lot of this is created because we've got cheap, automated logistical systems that means that we can get everything, you know, like we've reduced the marginal cost of, you know, of everything, right? Like, you know, we've built Utopia, and it's a really sad place, right? Then I don't know if you've ever caught Utopia for Realists by Rutger Bergman, I think his name is, but he sort of said that in like Renaissance Italy that there was a dream that that the birds were going to fly through the window already cooked. Well, I had a takeaway curry last night, and that basically happened, right? So we're in utopia, right? But I will get to the answer to the question.
Yeah, no.
Right? But like,
I know, I'm enjoying the journey.
But like, so if we think about a society where we have become technologically divided, where we don't have real meaningful human interactions, we are human social creatures, right? Where loneliness is prevalent, where for whatever reason the dangers in society has increased the levels of cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's, and like obviously there's not necessarily the research to drive causal effect, but we're covered in blue light in society, which means we're not sleeping properly, which means our mental health is higher, and all of the different explosion in conditions that we have at the moment that are coming. And every single time we go for that, like let's say we speak to a chatbot and it goes, oh, got an app for that. Yeah, you're lonely. We've got a loneliness chatbot for that, right?
Yeah.
Like, and if we just think all of those interactions are technological, that's a very sad vision for a human system. But it's not a million miles away from some of the things that I'm seeing being brought in isolation. Right? And we're sort of thinking, oh, we've got this problem. Well, we can do a chatbot for that. We can do that. For me, I think there is I'm through I suppose the root of thinking about sort of progressive decentralization. At the heart of it, you've got real human connection. And I did some work for the Health Foundation a few years ago, where we were trying to help them design a program of investment around technology that can better care, that isn't just solely aligned with the current objectives. The current objectives being quicker hamster wheel, right? Cheaper, cost of delivery, making sure that we're reducing the list and seeing people and increasing the amount of people who are being seen when, everyone's getting more and more multi-morbidities. So, and, there's an amazing writer called Hilary Cottam, who's wrote a book called Radical Help, which is actually, again, very much a decentralized, sort of community-based, people working together, taking away the rigid structures of sort of hierarchy and autocracy and people in silos, and just saying, here's a common problem, let's solve that together and find ways to solve that. And I think within this, what we tried to look at was like, are there a series of design principles that can help us to think about like, what is good relation? So a lot of her stuff was that it was about that people's route to better well-being and better lives is through relational support, not like siloed, automated support, because this department doesn't talk to this department, doesn't talk to this department, and this person gives you a medicine which contraindicates with this medicine, and so on and so forth. And like, for me, at the root of this, I think that there needs to be a parallel stream of things happening. We need to have a vision for what empowered communities with agency supporting each other. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face in society at the moment is that we are, so to borrow from, it's not my idea, it's Yuval Noah Harari's, right? I'm not going to nick his idea, it's bloody Yuval Noah Harari, right? People are going to be like, well, hold on, that's not his idea, right? So, in Sapiens, Yuval Noah Harari talked about the evolution of religion and also some of the things that we excused ourselves doing, and for example, the mass creation of agriculture rather than animals that we all live in the woods with, And, he said that the conclusion or the contemporary religion here is two things. One is the institution, the paternalistic state that does everything for you, that is responsible for all your mental health conditions and your obesity and all of these different things, and don't worry, we'll look after you. And the other one is the capital model, right? What's interesting is the paternalistic state is fucked. It's floundering, right? And in the second one, it's broke, right? So out of these two elements, these two, like if we say, all right, this is the religion, but this is the model, flat out fucked, right? So if we then think about, well, what do we have? What are the assets that we have? We have people who have time, who can help each other. Really great way to solve loneliness, get people together. And so I think for me, technology can play a fantastic role. Like I have a wonderful street of people, and everyone's always WhatsApping each other all week. We're doing it all week long and lending each other stuff and helping each other out. And, sadly someone on our street died a couple of weeks ago, and we're all going to the funeral and organising stuff, and we organise parties and stuff like that together. We do that through technology. We're all in our houses, but we're sending WhatsApp. We aren't in the middle of the street having having a town hall every week. Technology enables us to have closer connections and to be productive together. So I think the idea for an AI-enabled society is that we should think about what are the best things that make us human that we can do and give to each other that also solves some of the issues when we get displaced in certain roles. And then think about how technology can facilitate that. Humans first, technology second. And, people say people process technology or humans, but again, we don't have this vision for what does a really great society look like and what role can that do? There has been zero investment, as far as I can see, from the centre ever in enabling that. Right? Maybe someone will correct me on that. But, that's what it's been fantastic that the Health Foundation has been sort of, doing. I've been involved in a few projects in that, in trying to sort of say, can we create some examples that can inspire us? Because there aren't many, because it's not being invested at the moment. So I suppose in terms of the design of the system, I'm just one person kicking some ideas with you, right? And I know for me, it's about people and then technology, and technology facilitating people immediately and across huge amounts of areas. We can go into niches and that can be great.
Yeah.
We can get really excited with someone in New Zealand about a particular thing, and that's wonderful. That gives us a multifaceted sort of fabric of a, geographically unlimited society, but focusing on the immediate, because we're all, no matter how much we're using our phones, you and I are still only 3 meters away from each other, right?
Yeah.
That's not 3 meters, 3 foot, right? It's the lights.
Should go on Specsavers.
So yeah, I'll do it on the way back. Yeah, and so that's the design I'd like to see. That's a hugely long answer for a short question.
No, it's that's the thing. There's
the complexity of this topic, right?
Yeah, there's so much to get your teeth into in this topic, and there's also, it sounds like there is also potential for digital technology, but specifically AI, to sort of help with this decentralization, but also empowering clinicians to do the work that they do best and what they want to do. And there's an argument for that, again, not replacing, but freeing up clinicians' time so they can do the stuff that they do best, like helping people and stuff like that. But it's how that fits in, and where do you really see AI making its way to reach that kind of level of design that you were talking about?
And there are some amazing examples of technology bringing people together. Give you an example in the pandemic, where like groups from people just randomly came together because they wanted to sing sea shanty songs, because they wanted to get through it together, and all this kind of stuff. Technology can be a fantastic enabler. And we should be, I think, we kind of need to hold in both hands. We need to be inspired in what's the best in people. Because, I love playing computer games, like Keith discussed with you, right? I love playing computer games. I've got no time because I've got young kids and I don't want to be playing computer games all the time. But I love technology. I love playing with it. I love being inspired and energized. And I love using it to propel my own creativity. I love it to connect with people. And it can do amazing things. But at the same time, what really makes me happy is people. As much as an introvert I am, people make me happy. Human connections, proximity to people. And so trying to find the best of who we are at the moment and what is the design without technology for what great would look like? And then what is the capability of technology to harness that? I think the same applies in the health system as just in our communities. And, I try not to differentiate between paternalistic health system and us just out there just living our damn lives, right?
Yeah.
Because, the original Greek term of health, I think, was just a person's own being in their community. And, that's not correct. It was something like that. I read it recently. Yeah. It wasn't a big institution that you go to who solves all your problems for you.
Yeah,
that's the modern interpretation of it.
That's interesting as well, because your the point you mentioned there about what does it look like without technology, what does this future look like without technology, reminds me of something that you said previously about this idea of technology as a Trojan horse to demonstrate where friction lies in the system. So could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So when I left my organisation, I rocked up to this large healthcare provider in the north of England, and I was like, what I want to do is I want to, because everyone's looking for their digital transformation plans, and we want to think about doing what's our capability and all of this kind of stuff. And I was like, you've got all of these amazing people in your organisation, like really amazing people, right? Like, what about if we do some projects where we can go in, we can work with these teams, and rather than some centralised program management team or whatever, comes in with a piece of technology and we're going to do it to you, what we're going to do is we're going to try and ask some really big questions around how they would see the best possible application of technology to do the best work of their lives, right? And I was very lucky that I had some organisations who really went, yeah, this is what we want. I was working quite a lot with the non-profit sort of providers that sort of emerged around sort of like 15 years ago and had like slightly more sort of socialist views. So they were very aligned with me, and given I just built a non-profit before, we had a lot of connection points. But actually, yesterday I was like one of those organisations, I was having a meeting with the CEO of that organisation just yesterday as my last meeting, and talking about some of these principles that we were trying to instill. And so the hypothesis was quite simple, right? Was that we've got the operating system as I've described it. We've got the culture, the overuse of meetings. We've got the rules of how people work. And then inside, we've got plans to do stuff, which would be using technology to improve the service or something like that. And the approach was to take this Trojan horse, to go in, to work with the teams, and what I would do is I would help hold a space for them. I'd create this protective bubble. We wouldn't wrap ourselves up in governance and all of this kind of stuff and treat it like it was complicated and say, what we're going to do is we're going to work out everything that's going to go wrong and stop that happening. We're going to work out exactly how everyone should behave, and then we'll create a policy for it. What we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to try something, and we're going to try and make it safe and containerized, and we're going to observe it in its most authentic form, and then we're going to say, what do we learn from it? Does it work? And a lot of this work obviously coincided with a pandemic, which created some really interesting dynamics in this. But what the principle was that I managed to get a degree of buy-in from the leaders that their organisation would need to change to accommodate it. So what we did is, and it was very much based on the practice of Aaron Dignan in a book called Brave New Work, which was that we would try and do experiments that would create tensions. Mm-hmm. And then in real time, we would address the tensions that said where there may be a blocker in the operating system of the organisation, right? We want to do this. Oh, no, you can't because there's this policy or this process. Yeah. And it wasn't about flagrant disregard of process. It was about conscious consideration that process says that everything is predictable. It goes back to Newtonian rules, like governance and process and all of that. It says we should plan everything, create a really massive Gantt chart, and we should have this little area around people do change. Well, what is people do change, right? People have, I remember there was a time when we were going for a really big change in one school health team. Mm-hmm. And the team was quite nervous about it happening. And we were getting there a couple of days before, and the service lead said, Liam, I'm quite worried about this. Some of the team are feeling really nervous about, and this was about them communicating in a totally different way. So it was actually about them moving off email and using Microsoft Teams, which might seem like a small thing, but that was changing their whole communication behavior when they were trying to run a service. And they were getting quite worried about it and upset and stuff like that. And so we had this meeting where we just got together and said, right, what feels unsafe? Why do we think it feels unsafe? What could happen in our minds that would be unsafe enough that we'd have to go back? And what would we do? And it wasn't my job to do anything other than just ask questions, just to help people think about this. And what happened is that we asked some questions, we got together, and we created a feeling of collective safety where there was something that people were nervous about and they wouldn't change. Ultimately, the thing was successful. They loved it. They came for it. There was some difficulty. They worked through the difficulty together. But what they came up with, they were like, we never want to go back. This is great. We've got this new way of working and it's really good and we can see the benefit and so on and so forth. But you can't put that in a Gantt chart. How do you plan for that? How do you plan for people going through that experience? How do you plan when you've got 42 different services that are entirely different and what they're going to do and what that one needs versus that one? And I think the approach was, we're not going to treat this as complicated. We're going to treat it as complex. And humans are complex. Groups of humans are complex. Digital technology of a more creative kind is complex. So we're going to try and observe it, and then we're going to try and build consensus on how we're going to use it, where we're going to use it, what we're going to use it for, and we are going to then use that to inform the policies that we want to write in the governance. And so the organisation I'm talking about, wonderful organisation, Your Healthcare in southwest London. God, I should know that. And what happened is they had a patient record system that got hacked, and a lot of the experimentation we've done is around how they could use different tools in the Microsoft 365 ecosystem for them to try and build this agency in their teams.
I see.
And they got hacked and their system went down. And within a week, they used that system that they've been experimenting with to build their own electronic patient record system to cover it. And it got profiled by Microsoft, talking about one of the examples, because they'd realised they had these creation tools and that they could use it to be able to run stuff. And for me, it was just so empowering. It was so great. And, like a giant in a few weeks, like my session I'm going to be running is about clinical empowerment and how do we do that. And I've seen that it can work, and I've seen that we can use this Trojan horse approach in order to try and reshape and rebuild an organisation organically. And I think by building more agency, we can build digital organisations, but it means that we need to flip our perspective about how these organisations work. And I've seen amazing examples, so many amazing examples in teams that I've worked with around this. Unfortunately, I don't do it as much as I can at the moment because the NHS is ridiculously reactive and doesn't want to do this stuff. They just want to get shit done. And so, a lot of the progressivism is dying out. But I think it will come back, And so I'm hoping in the future there'll be more chances to do Trojan horse activities,
Yeah. Is it like the NHS at the moment is trying to catch up with itself before it can think about what it wants to do next? He said it doesn't want to do these the system doesn't really want to take time to think about these things.
I think the system, I don't know, I think that the system would probably think that, it's very all well and good to do these, but that's not, but the ideal is we need, let's say we've got loads of freedom and loads of money and stuff like that, but real change doesn't happen in ideal circumstances.
Yeah.
But I think the system has locked itself down to driving efficiency and just pushing this and just getting on with doing what they're doing. And it's just I think the system is just so drained of the ability to have energy and ambition, even though actually there was huge amounts of it when we had the pandemic in 2020. There's some amazing, inspiring things that happened. We just weren't able to bottle that. So I don't know, and my concern is that the current circumstances, the changing world, is going to keep us in this huge amount of scarcity, and that this scarcity is going to make us feel that we can't imagine things being different because we've just got to do enough. And so, I think this is what really worries me about, are we ever going to be able to give ourselves the space and time to imagine this? Because I can't see the world around us getting better, I can't see it getting easier.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I had a period of sort of a bit of despair a couple of years ago when I was really finding it difficult to find organisations who actually had the money and the time to do it, and they were just like, I'd love to, but we can't right now, maybe in the future. Yeah. And I was kind of thinking we're just going to sleepwalk into just driving efficiency, more technology, driving efficiency, and we're going to end up with something. And we've got this period, and I don't think that period's over, where we could actually really come together and say, hold on, let's just forget all the rules and all of the constructs that we're treating like universal laws. We've got AI. Let's just think about how we could use it and reimagine risk. Try and, I was talking to someone quite, in one of the big AI companies, like the very, very well-known AI companies, who were saying, we can't get the NHS to touch this. They're too scared of touching it, right? But now's the period where we can really like use our imagination and play with it, right? Because if it just keeps getting worse and worse, then we're going to get dragged into something else. And like, I don't know, that's the thing that kind of keeps me salty sometimes, you know?
Yeah. And I think that leads on quite nicely to something else that I've seen you mention or something that you mentioned to me was, you've obviously worked with a lot of leaders in the healthcare space through part of your work, and you said about having to almost break this mold of their perspective of how the system should work or how the world should be. And firstly, why do you think that is? But do you think there's also a parallel between that and leaders in the NHS system?
The philosophy that I have been using and borrowed from Aaron Dignan, who I mentioned before, is based on the principles of two things, and that I use this in teaching about strategy and all different kinds of digital things, which is we need to be people positive and complexity conscious. We need to try and build an environment that gives people more credit than we give them, because autocratic rule-based systems assume people need to get in line and they can't be trusted. That's why we create all of this governance. The next one is that shit is complex now. It's not complicated. We have to, you know, like, to borrow the Cynefin framework by Dave Snowden, you know, like, there is a distinction. I teach this to the military, actually. You know, I do a course for military leaders around the distinction between complex and complicated. A complicated thing is it involves solely controllable and measurable parts, right? Like a Boeing 747. Yes, of course, you'll have a pilot be doing it, but ultimately the plane itself needs to be done properly. You know, like you can't Kanban. You can't agile the hell out of a plane. It's just got to work, and it's got to be designed with real planning, treated as a complicated thing. But if it starts getting into territory of human behaviour, which most of the system of health is, then you've got to think about it in a different way, which is, instead of plan, act, review, you've got to really probe and sense and then build the structure around it. And yet to me, it feels like the most obvious thing in the world. Like, yes, there is not one kind of problem. There is a complex thing and a complicated thing. And being conscious of that complexity, like, I've seen so many people have light bulb moments when I've had the privilege of teaching it, and they're just like, oh my god, yeah, like we never sit down and say, what kind of problem is this? Cynefin's been around for bloody years. I think it was in the Harvard Business Review in '94 or something like that. Like, we're talking a very long time. It also covers chaotic, such as the pandemic, and then there's also like really simple ones where it's just like no-brainers. And so, in terms of complexity conscious, this means that we don't create a big Gantt chart and implement stuff. Now, the culture, as I've said a few times in the NHS, is to avoid risk, to make things measurable, to try and, like, much of the language, which is dressed up in different language, screams that the NHS, the philosophy of the NHS is that it's a mechanical system. That's why we have all of the pathways and all of this different stuff, that we have. We use evidence, which is a very flawed system, because generally it's companies with lots of money having multiple goes. And I worked in this area for like 10 years in, the organisation I built around medicine prescribing. But, where they keep trying until they get an answer and they'll find something, So, whereas evidence, like, you and I don't have the resources if there's something that we wanted to prove to create the evidence that would be sufficient to a system. So, there's a huge amount of bias, but that has entirely dominated a very dogmatic form of thinking in how modern healthcare works. My partner's an osteopath, and she can't say that she can help someone with COPD because there's not enough evidence to say that she can be regulated for it. But actually, someone with COPD having movement, and support with their general function is hugely beneficial, but you can't say it, right? So, like in the teaching that I've, been doing with a lot of leaders and so on, I think what I've tried to do is I always taken the same approach of just trying to start with a problem in human experience. So these are two people in your organisation who are trying to innovate, right? This person really, really wants to solve a problem. This one has an idea for a piece of technology that they want to do. And we kind of went through the story of that, kind of helped them to see it. And I tried to make sure that all the way through I was trying to sort of illustrate where it was being treated as complicated and that person wasn't being trusted. They were had to go through a rabbit hole of bureaucracy. And in both cases, in that story, for example, both the individuals, one of them said, fuck it, I'm going rogue, and they just went off and did it for themselves. And that person became, they point them because they're breaking the rules and governance. But that person started with a real noble ambition, right? They just wanted to improve care for their patients, right?
Yeah.
They weren't trying to swindle anyone. They weren't trying to cut corners. They just wanted to do something different. And in the other one, the other person went, and this is exact email that I had from someone. I really want to do something, but this is overwhelming. I can't do it. This is too much. And that person would never put a proposal forward in an organisation again. So they'd become sort of, actively disengaged from the idea of innovation in their organisation. And so we went through that, and there was a number of sessions that we've used around this. And there was a leader who was, she was the sort of chief people officer for the organisation. And, she was like, I'm part of the problem. I get it. Like, I can see that we failed that individual in that journey. And there's stories all the time about people being failed, right? In terms of people who are trying to do the right thing, like whistleblowers and stuff like that. So for me, I think, I don't know, I've kind of like a jokey saying that if I got given total power in the NHS, I'd like to get all the power in the NHS so I could give it away the next day, you know? So we could just stop this hoarding and this central view. But we have this central methodology, which is entirely Newtonian. It's entirely based on the NHS as an industrial system, which is why we think we can bring someone in from a logistics company like Marks and Spencer's to come in and solve it, right? Who knows nothing about the human endeavour of healthcare. And time again, it's all of these tech companies coming in to save this. And because that story is prevalent, it's pervasive. But for me, I've seen so many times that I'm absolutely 100% convinced that the best form of leadership and the best models that emerge from collective leadership building them is based on helping people to be empowered and to do the best work of their lives. And that means trying to find ways to instill responsibility, to robustly advise and support them, but to get out of their fucking way and let them do it, right? And of course, there are caveats and safeguards that go along with that in certain areas, like surgery. You don't want, someone in surgery kind of, just bringing in a spade because they've got an idea. And there's certain areas where you just need to make sure that doesn't happen. But then actually surgery is more complicated in its sense than complex, right? Like, of course, they're doing something with a human, but anatomy is generally pretty much the same, right? Yeah. So, in that case, you can have more methodology. And I'm not talking about removing it all. Yeah. It's just about having a sort of duality of thinking around this, really. Yeah. So I think if we did that, then we'd get more engagement with tech companies. We'd get the right kind of engagement with tech companies. We'd see more AI taking place. We'd see more people imagining how they could use artificial intelligence and other forms of automation and other forms of technology in the system. And it could be really wonderful. It could be a really wonderful collaboration. We're doing the opposite.
That's really interesting that you, because one of my follow-up questions to that was going to be like, do you think there is a role for big tech in this picture?
Yeah. I think that technology is the natural pseudo-privatization of the whole of societal function, and that will hugely reverberate and impact our, we hold on to the NHS being, sort of that it's a public thing, but firstly, pretty much every general practice is a profit-making organisation in a sense. The tech industry is going to come in and it's going to play a role in this, and that's going to continue. Like, we just had an election where Elon Musk seems to now run the United States of the Americas. What's it called again? United States of America. That's it. Yeah, I've heard of it. So we're seeing tech come in, and states have little ability to do anything about that. We talked about Palantir coming in because it was a really obvious thing about them coming into the NHS, but there's going to be loads of big tech companies, and right now we're going to have sort of peaks and troughs of activity, and smaller companies will get hoovered up because that's the model that's happening at the moment. And they will go into big tech, and big tech will play a bigger role. But that doesn't mean. Actually, let me go back a step, right?
Yeah.
I think because it goes to this blue pill, red pill thing, right?
Yeah.
If we totally deactivate our whole society and communities and just turn everybody into dependents, then they're just going to look for another entity to be dependent on.
Yeah.
If we put the time and energy now into activating our communities and building local, real sort of, debate and discussion, and how, how humans can support each other. We've got this vision for the best of humans and using the best of technology, then we limit the power that some of these tech companies have. And I think one of the things that I think is one of the biggest things to despair of is that we've lost or never really supported the beautiful role of debate and educating ourselves. And if we have a society that we can try and educate around, like ultra-processed foods and all of these different things at the moment, and the role of technology, and make it part of a discussion where we are our preparation for this technological revolution is that we're trying to activate as many people as possible to be real, genuine stakeholders. Because the election's farcical at the moment, right? Like, the US election was a total farce, and what's happened is that we've just sort of the dumbification of society, where it's all about slogans and stuff like that. Like, the NHS is super complex; it's a really hard thing, but like maybe there's a chance that we can actually help people to play a bigger role in understanding how the NHS works, so they can make educated decisions. The same way that we voted on Brexit based on whether you like Boris or not. And like. That's a real tragedy, and the only thing that I can think is, if that's the society that we keep on maintaining, then the time when Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and the other big tech leaders come in, we're just going to be there ready and waiting for them. It's just going to be a different master to be dependent on. And what's their accountability going to be like? What's their relationship with people going to be like, and where's that lead us? Because I'll be honest, having read Homo Deus and 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, that's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying on what that means for humanism.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty pretty stark outlook in some ways, but
scary. Shit's scary at the moment, right?
Yeah,
because it's possible.
Yeah, exactly. And do you see anywhere that they're doing it well? You said about one of the Scandinavian countries earlier about technology integration.
Netherlands. Yeah. It's right. I couldn't say the United States of America. You put Netherlands in Scandinavia, right?
So, are there some examples of where you think that there are lessons to be learnt from different health systems? Because the NHS is extremely unique, isn't it?
It is a very unique health system. The interesting thing, and this isn't an endorsement for privatisation of the healthcare system, but actually... the Netherlands, I think, sort of 14 and 7 years ago, or maybe 15 and 6 or 8 years ago, I'm not exactly sure entirely when, but they decided to embrace the integration agenda, which was about proper partnership working, and they built their whole, so they reformed and basically semi-privatised, but in a conscious way, which was really good. And interestingly, there was a model which came from the UK, which was the 5 laws of integration. And don't quote me on exactly what they are. I wrote an article about it a while ago that no one read because it was way too intellectual and just me dicking around with my own ideas, right? I got like 6 likes, right? But like basically it was very much, there were these really good rules which act as a principle for integration, really sensible. And they used them as the bedrock of designing how they wanted their system to function. And there are elements of private and there are elements of public, and there is fair, equitable provision that they've done. And I don't think it necessarily matters about the model, but I think what we can be inspired from is that there was conscious consideration and some really good principles for what they actually wanted to do. And they made some tough choices. And actually, generally, their system is great. The Netherlands is also home to Buurtzorg, which is one of the largest self-managing organisations in the world, and that is a group that is basically community nursing, where what they do is they create little micro teams, where these little micro teams and Josta Block, the CEO of the organisation, who basically says, I'm a CEO who's not a CEO, he doesn't write strategy, he writes open musings and then invites people to come and play with it so they can find a way to sort of bring it together. Their health outcomes are amazing. Their staff happiness, what they manage to do, their prevention stuff is amazing. They have the best outcomes for community nursing around. And the only thing that is fundamentally different is that they say to their teams, you're in charge. To the point where when more organisations were coming into them, they had to set up their own office, they had to paint it. There was no this is your job and this is that job. They were you've got to decide what your office looks like and how you're going to do things and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, that is like, if you go into like the self-managing community, and it's like, lots of people have looked at it and, they've said, oh, it couldn't work in the UK. Well, it can't work in the UK because we've never allowed anything like that to happen, right? It can work if we wanted it to work. It's not just because the Dutch are Dutch that it's, it works like this. So I think there's a lot to learn from the Netherlands in particular, but I think generally, there's lots to learn from, some really great stuff that comes out from the US, and their health system from a, equity of care is absolute dog shit, right? So like, but there's areas that we can learn from that. And I think, like there's also organisations in the UK. There's an organisation called Here, which is in Brighton, which does absolutely amazing stuff around illness to wellness. I was on the board of an organisation called Accelerate that did an illness to wellness model, and it was all about, like, it was in wound care and lymphedema, and it was a hugely complex area, and most people just get it and they live with it. And they managed to say, we're just going to fix it. We're going to put loads of energy and attention into fixing it rather than just seeing them and seeing their decline.
Yeah.
And the evidence at the end was stunning. And again, a lot of these organisations are organisations that are highly progressive and self-managing and have employee ownership and have a lot more, around that. So there's definitely models that we can learn from, and I think we need to learn from in this. But we, in my course where I teach tech companies around the NHS, I'm like that. They don't, like, if you tell someone in the NHS that you've done something in Israel or you've done something in the Netherlands, they don't care. They don't care. Because it's too different. It's not the NHS, right? It wouldn't work here, sort of proper, sort of slightly xenophobic, island nation mentality. But, and again, I think that comes back to the point that we don't have the agency to reimagine how we could work.
So that was a really bleak outlook, but yeah, what are you?
Yeah.
What is most exciting? Because of course there is a lot to be excited about still, isn't there?
Yeah. Like, what I see is that people are opening their eyes now, and like I remember, like 7 years ago, which doesn't seem like that long ago, but like 7 years ago when I started trying to advocate for the things that I do and advocate for, which was, in the microcosm of organisations and not big systems. I guess I've just seen patterns and tried to apply it in a larger sphere. But like, the thing for me is that, like, year after year, I'm seeing more people going, like, things need to change, needs to be different. The world around us is different. There's like a denial, there's sort of less denial that we're in this sort of cozy world that, like, the cozy world that where everything can just stay the same and tech will come and do it. But we, just technology, it's just another tool, isn't it? I don't think anyone's saying that right now. And I think with this coming through, and I think some of the explosive introductions of things like Chat GTP, which shook us all, right? Like, there's a wonderful AI leader in the NHS space called Max Jones, and he teaches on the Digital Academy. But he and I were having a one-to-one chat, just sort of catching up. And I was like, like you really specialise in this, Max, like in terms of, OpenAI and the versions that came through. And I was teaching about it before ChatGTP came out. And I was like, how much did it surprise you? And he was like, yeah, it surprised everyone, right? And I think this is the new status quo, right? Just big surprises, just disruption coming from everywhere. And I think within that, there's kind of a moment, and I hope we don't squander that moment. I'm trying to keep positive, right? But I think more people are seeing that things really have to change and we can't keep on going on. And I see, like amazing ideas from people like John Alexander, who's written Citizens, and, sort of Cormac Russell, who's very much talking about sort of active-based community development ideas. And, there's like lots of people who are bringing out these ideas who are getting resonance. And like for me, sitting in my little office just knocking out ideas and articles, I'm getting huge amounts of people sort of coming to me saying, like, yeah, totally, I really agree with it. I also get ones who say, it's no, you can't. That's not. It's slightly fantastical. But like, I feel that there's this emerging. Well, there's an emerging generation that I think are asking for things to be slightly different, for good and ill. But I think that there is a growing acknowledgement that we really need to change things. And I hope that the speed of us asking for something better will be quicker than the speed of us kind of going down the plug hole. Right? So I can't detach this hope from the reality that we're in, but I feel a lot of despair about the society we're in at the moment and what we're doing and what's going on. Like, not to mention all of the recent political stuff that's going on. There's the ideas in Labour's plans around prevention, community, and technology, if combined and really consciously thought through, could be really interesting and exciting. I'm not sure that it will, but there's a possibility. And maybe if it's not exciting enough, maybe people will push back and say, "I'm sorry, it's not good enough." So I think there's opportunity, and I think something really good can emerge from it. And that's why I bang my drum every week talking about this stuff and trying to advocate for it, because otherwise I'm just sitting there silently waiting for whatever comes, and I don't want to wait for it. I want to try and help reimagine it,
Yeah.
So I feel enough hope to invest my energy into it. Otherwise I wouldn't be here chatting to you about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's all that needs to be said about that. If it feels like something you can commit your time and your energy into, and as much
my
as
life
you
too,
do,
actually.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
This is my life's work.
Yeah, exactly.
Whether it gets anywhere or not, at least I've tried.
Yeah, exactly. And to quickly touch on AI as well, this is a very out there sort of question.
Yeah.
But do you think there's a world where, if things continue down this route and artificial intelligence does get so good that it could play a role in helping to resolve the system as it is?
I think we can use the amazing potential of AI to do some really wonderful things. I don't think AI will do that. I think we will do that. AI is a tool, and we can use that tool. Like, let's imagine how China's going to design its society over the next 15, 20 years, right? Are they going to be empowering everyone? No. Are they? The philosophy, like, if we just take, the way that China used technology, including artificial intelligence, after the pandemic in order to control and manage its population, right? There's a living, real-time example of technology being used in a way that none of us really want. But we also see the best of it in our day-to-day in the society that we live in. Hopefully we do, and we get really excited by it. So, AI is, I think this is the concern of technophilia, right? Like, AI isn't the determinant of the end. It is the tool that we use. Now, it's used to achieve that end. I suppose my slight concern is that if history tells us anything, it's that humans are really good into, like, sleepwalking into unexpected. We've gone hope, and now we've gone back to this shit. But to take us into unexpected consequences. We've wandered into world wars and Cuban Missile Crises and Donald Trump and Brexit and all of these different things that are just like where it's been like, how did we get to this, right? How did we make this happen? It depends on how we, do we want to create the next contemporary Dickensian society? Do we want to create the things that Yuval Noah Harari is really worried about? No, we don't. Is human nature to just shuffle on and not try and tackle the biggest things and dream about what they could be? Like, well, let's look at the evidence right now. As I started in the very beginning, I don't see a community which is looking at how we can absolutely make the best of AI and build a society which is, the one that we, have been told. It's almost like we say, people won't have to work as much and they can follow their pursuits and all of that. We've heard that dream and it's been floated around, right? But then we look at everything we're doing. We're doing nothing that gives us any evidence that we are pointing the boat in that direction. So we've got to make a conscious choice. We need to be active. We need to debate. We need to discuss. it is possible to build that, and AI can give us some really fantastic, and it will of course give us good and bad. There is no just bad and just good, right? It will give us a mix of stuff, right?
Yeah.
You know, the same with the Industrial Revolution, where Dickensian times, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, so they said, you know. Was that about that? Yeah, it was about that time, right? So like, it will probably be both, and there'll be lots of unexpected consequences, but like, we have our consciousness, we have our time, we have our energy, which we could put into making something really cool.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that. Well,
thank you so much for giving your thoughts. It was really interesting to chat to you, and
it's been great. You can come and buy a bit of fluff at the end. Yeah. That was about 6 hours long, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, I reckon 6, maybe.
It's like 1 a.m.